Tank Morrison pressed a cold knife against her neck, reeking of meth and sweat. 4 more bikers closed in behind, laughter curling like smoke. But the blonde waitress didn't flinch. Tray steady, eyes calm. 12 seconds later, all 5 men were down, gasping on the pavement. She straightened her apron without a single hair out of place. How does a minimum wage waitress drop 5 armed men without breaking a sweat? The answer lies beneath the uniform, in scars, silence, and a name that once earned her $1 million Taliban bounty, Ghost 23. Mel's Diner sat on Route 66 like a sun-bleached monument to forgotten dreams, its neon sign flickering between life and death. Sarah Mitchell arrived at 4:45 every morning, parking her beaten Honda behind the dumpsters. The hierarchy was simple. Truckers owned the counter, construction crews claimed the booths, and women navigated like prey animals. Sarah had perfected invisibility. Blonde dye over dark hair, 15 extra pounds, a practiced stoop that made her forgettable. In a place where staff turnover was high and questions were few, she dissolved into the background. The other waitresses noticed things. Jenny, 19 and naive, wondered why Sarah never defended herself. Donna, the veteran, saw how Sarah's eyes tracked exits and threats, but nobody connected the dots. Today started like every other. Big Jim snapping his fingers for coffee, Pete, the manager, hiding in his office, the ancient jukebox struggling against diesel-fueled conversations. Sarah moved between tables with practiced efficiency, cataloging bruised knuckles and favored sides out of habit. The morning's routine held until 10:37 a.m., when motorcycle engines announced the arrival of the Thunder Road, MC. 5 Harleys pulled into the parking lot like predators marking territory, their riders dismounting with the confidence of men who'd never met real consequences. They didn't know it yet, but they were about to discover that some people carry their demons quietly, waiting for moments exactly like this. The door slammed open hard enough to rattle the windows, and Tank Morrison filled the frame like a bad omen. 6'4", wrapped in leather and menace, with arms thick as fence posts and a beard that hadn't seen soap in weeks. His crew followed like hyenas trailing a lion, Razor, Diesel, Bones, and Apache, each one uglier than the last and proud of it. They didn't walk into Mel's Diner so much as invade it, their presence sucking the oxygen from the room. Regular customers suddenly found fascinating things to study in their coffee cups. Tank's eyes swept the room and locked onto Sarah like a targeting system. "Well, look what we got here," he drawled, voice rough as gravel. "Fresh meat." He claimed the biggest booth, shoving aside an elderly couple who were still eating. His crew laughed as the old folks scrambled away, leaving their half-finished breakfast behind. Sarah approached with her order pad, movements deliberate and unhurried. Tank's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist before she could speak. "You're a pretty little thing, ain't you? What's your name, sugar?" His grip was meant to hurt, to establish dominance. Sarah's pulse never changed. "Coffee?" she asked, voice neutral as tap water. Tank's face darkened at being ignored. "I asked you a question, bitch." The other bikers snickered, already enjoying the show. Tank yanked her closer, close enough that she could smell the stale beer and yesterday's meth seeping from his pores. "Maybe you didn't hear me. I said, what's your name?" Sarah met his eyes with the kind of calm that comes from staring down worse things than bikers. "Coffee?" she repeated. The temperature in the diner seemed to drop 10 degrees. Jenny watched from behind the counter, hands shaking as she clutched a coffee pot. Pete had vanished into the back office the moment the bikes pulled up. The truckers kept their eyes down, unwilling to risk their necks for a waitress they didn't even know. Everyone waited for Sarah to fold. Tank released her wrist, only to grab a handful of her hair, yanking her head back hard enough to make most people cry out. Sarah didn't make a sound. "You think you're tough?" he snarled. "Think you're too good to talk to me?" His free hand moved to her hip, possessive and threatening. "Maybe I need to teach you some manners. Take you out back and show you how to be friendly." Something shifted in Sarah's stance, subtle as a card dealer palming an ace. Her weight transferred to the balls of her feet. Her breathing deepened, rhythmic and controlled. Her free hand drifted to her hip, fingers curling around nothing but muscle memory. Inside her mind, a war raged in the space of a heartbeat. The ghost wanted to move, one strike to his throat, another to disable his knife hand, systematic destruction of threats in order of proximity. But Sarah the waitress screamed louder, "You promised. You left that world behind. David died because of who you were, not who you are now." Her hand trembled, caught between reaching for a weapon that wasn't there and maintaining her cover. 5 years of peaceful invisibility against 20 years of lethal training. The moment stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Why didn't she act immediately? Because violence was always her last option now. Because 5 years of hiding had taught her that every action had consequences. Because she'd promised herself she'd never be that person again unless there was no other choice. Tank was pushing her toward that line, but she wasn't there yet. "Let go. Now." The words came out like bullets, each one precise and cold. Tank laughed, the sound ugly as breaking glass. "Or what, princess? You gonna cry? Gonna call for help?" He tightened his grip, forcing her to look at him. "Nobody's coming to save you." Sarah's eyes went flat, empty as a shark's. The laugh died in Tank's throat. Something primal in his brain started screaming warnings, but his ego was louder than evolution. "I said, or what?" The question hung in the air like a challenge to fate itself, and fate was about to answer. Tank's crew formed a semicircle, cutting off any escape route. "Maybe we should all teach her some manners," Razor suggested, pulling out a knife. The blade caught the fluorescent lights, throwing shadows across Sarah's face. That's when the door chimed again. Marcus Washington entered, and everything changed. He'd been tracking the Thunder Road MC for 3 weeks as part of a federal task force on interstate drug trafficking. Their route always included this stretch of highway, and he'd stationed himself at the truck stop across the street every morning, waiting. When a trucker burst in babbling about bikers terrorizing some waitress at Mel's, Marcus's blood ran cold. The description, blonde, too calm under pressure, moving like she was cataloging threats, matched the woman he'd been quietly watching over for 5 years. His promise to a dying man in Kandahar. "I'll find her. I'll keep her safe." He grabbed his jacket and ran. "Stand down, Morrison," Marcus said, his voice carrying military authority. Tank turned, annoyed at the interruption. "Mind your own business, old man." Marcus stepped closer, and now Sarah recognized him, her former spotter, the man who'd saved her life in Kandahar. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and he saw the plea there. "Don't blow my cover." But some lines couldn't be uncrossed. "That's Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell you're putting hands on," Marcus said quietly. "Ghost 2-3, SEAL Team 6. The words detonated like a flashbang. Tank's grip loosened but didn't release. "Bullshit," he managed, but doubt was creeping in. Sarah's whole body had changed the moment Marcus spoke her call sign. The mask was cracking. "Halloween 2019, Marcus continued. Helmand Province, 12 hostages. She went in alone, came out with all of them breathing. Taliban put $1 million bounty on her head, got her fiancé instead. The story came out in bullet points, each one hitting harder than the last. The car bomb, the funeral, the disappearance into witness protection. Sarah's free hand had unconsciously moved into a combat stance. The transformation was subtle but complete, waitress to warrior in the space between heartbeats. Tank finally released her hair, hand dropping like he'd touched a live wire. "Prove it," he said, but his voice cracked. Sarah rolled up her sleeve slowly, revealing the SEAL trident tattoo and the scar that ran from wrist to elbow. "Outside," she said, her voice different now. Command voice, the one that had ordered men into battle. "All of you, now." What happens when a trained killer stops pretending to be harmless? Let me know in the comments what you think Sarah does next. The entire diner emptied into the parking lot like spectators at a gladiator match, but this wasn't entertainment. It was education. Sarah removed her apron with the same precision she'd once used to disassemble rifles in the dark, folding it into a perfect square and handing it to Jenny. 5 bikers spread out in a semicircle, trying to use numbers to their advantage. They'd done this before, jumped lone victims in parking lots from here to Houston. But they'd never faced someone who'd been outnumbered in places where losing meant torture, not embarrassment. Sarah stood in the center of their formation like she was exactly where she wanted to be. Tank charged first, all 250 pounds of stupid pride and fragile ego. Sarah wasn't there when his fist arrived. She'd shifted 6 inches left, just enough, and drove her elbow into his throat with surgical precision. He dropped like someone had cut his strings, gasping through a windpipe that would bruise but not break. Diesel and Bones came at her together, thinking teamwork would save them. Sarah caught Diesel's wrist, used his momentum to drive him face first into Bones's rising knee. The crack of nose cartilage was audible across the parking lot. She torqued Diesel's arm behind his back until he screamed, then swept Bones's legs while he was still stunned from accidentally breaking his friend's nose. Razor actually knew how to fight, had some training from his stint in county lockup. He lasted 4 seconds instead of 2. Sarah let him throw 3 punches, reading his patterns like a children's book, then struck twice. Solar plexus, carotid artery. He folded in half, then crumpled sideways, conscious but wishing he wasn't. Apache, the youngest and dumbest, pulled a knife. The crowd gasped. Sarah's expression didn't change. She waited until he committed to the thrust, then guided his wrist past her body, twisted, and the knife clattered across asphalt. Her knee met his groin with the force of 5 years of suppressed rage. He hit the ground in a fetal position, making sounds that weren't quite human. 12 seconds, 5 men down. Sarah hadn't broken a sweat, hadn't even breathed hard. She stepped over Tank's wheezing body and picked up her apron. "Your orders are getting cold," she said to no one in particular, then walked back inside like she'd just taken out the trash. The bikers helped each other to their motorcycles, Apache still curled up and crying. No threats of revenge, no promises to come back with more guys. They'd touched something primal and dangerous, and every instinct screamed at them to run. Inside, Sarah retied her apron and picked up her order pad. The silence was deafening until Jenny started a slow clap that spread through the diner like wildfire. Pete emerged from wherever he'd been hiding, face red with shame and something like awe. Word would spread through the trucker network within hours. Jenny approached her during a quiet moment, tears streaming down her face. She pulled out a worn photo. Her brother, 3rd Battalion Marines, killed in Helmand Province. "You were there when they brought him home," Jenny whispered. Sarah pulled her into a hug that said everything. Marcus lingered after the crowd dispersed. "They never forgot about you," he said simply. "The witness protection route runs through here. I've been keeping an eye out." Sarah understood now. Her choice of hiding place hadn't been random. Even in exile, she'd been unconsciously protecting others like herself. "There's a phone call coming," Marcus warned. "DOD wants you back. Your choice." He left her with that, knowing the decision would tear her apart. Should Sarah return to active duty or stay in hiding? What would you do with skills like hers? That evening, Sarah's phone rang with a number she'd memorized but never saved. Department of Defense, direct line. "Ghost 23, we need you." The voice belonged to Admiral Jessica Chen. "Voluntary assignment. Training the next generation. Your country is calling, Commander." Sarah stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror of her studio apartment. The fluorescent light flickered, making her face shift between shadow and substance. "Who are you?" she asked the mirror. The waitress who kept her head down and served eggs to truckers, or the warrior who'd stalked through Afghan mountains like vengeance itself. For 5 years she'd pretended the first could erase the second, but today proved that some things were carved too deep to sand away. The skills, the instincts, the hypervigilance, they weren't just training, they were her. She spent 3 sleepless nights wrestling with the choice, visiting David's grave at dawn each day. His headstone read, "Beloved Fiancé and Protector." On the 3rd morning, she realized she'd been reading it wrong. He wasn't just her protector. They'd protected each other, protected others, protected ideals bigger than themselves. Hiding hadn't honored his memory. It had diminished it. She called Admiral Chen with her decision. "I'll train them," Sarah said, "but I keep my job at Mel's. I've got people here who need me." The Admiral's silence spoke volumes. "Unconventional, but then you always were. Welcome back, Ghost." Sarah removed her engagement ring for the first time since the funeral, threading it onto a chain around her neck. Not forgetting, just carrying the weight differently. Jenny knocked on her door an hour later, somehow knowing everything had changed. "Teach me," the girl said. "Not to be a SEAL, just to be strong like you." Sarah saw herself 5 years ago, before the training, before the missions, before the loss. First lesson starts tomorrow, 4 a.m., don't be late. 6 months later, Mel's Diner had transformed into something between a truck stop and a sanctuary. Veterans found their way there like iron filings to a magnet, recognizing something in the way Sarah moved, the way she watched. She trained federal recruits 3 days a week, served coffee the other 4, and somehow found peace in the balance. Her name tag now read Sarah Ghost Mitchell. and Pete had framed a photo on the wall, Sarah shaking hands with the Secretary of Defense. The Thunder Road MC had dissolved after Tank's humiliation spread through the biker community. Some stories become warnings, some warnings become legends. The new girl, Christina, was getting hassled by 3 construction workers who thought her smile meant more than tips. Sarah materialized beside their table like her namesake, no longer pretending to be harmless. "Is there a problem here?" The foreman looked up, recognized her, and his face went white as fresh paper. "No, ma'am. We were just leaving. Sorry, Christina." They threw money on the table and evacuated like the building was on fire. Christina stared at Sarah with something between fear and worship. "How do you do that?" Sarah smiled, the expression reaching her eyes for the first time in years. "I stopped pretending to be weak." The phone rang as she was counting the till. Another number she recognized. SEAL Team 8 needed a consultant for an extraction operation. "This is Ghost 2-3, she answered, watching Jenny train the new girl, seeing the cycle of strength continuing. "What do you need?" She listened to the briefing while wiping down tables, existing in both worlds simultaneously. Warrior and waitress, protector and protected, ghost and flesh. Sarah hung up and looked around the diner, her diner now, in every way that mattered. Tomorrow she'd be hunting terrorists in Somalia. Tonight she had tables to serve. Both jobs required the same thing. Show up, do the work, protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The silence of experience weighs more than 1,000 empty boasts. Sarah Mitchell had learned to let her silence speak volumes. Have you ever underestimated someone who turned out to be extraordinary? Share your story below, and remember to subscribe for more incredible true stories.